Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
Hi, I'm Larry.
This is Jesse, who's missing at the moment. Hi, I'm Renny.
And I'm Josh. And unfortunately, Jesse's not feeling that well.
She turned into a bottle of wine.
We want to have someone or somebody to be placed in that seat as a placeholder or something to embody Jesse. And I thought that the perfect thing to embody Jesse and to think about Jesse is this bottle of wine. I got this as a Christmas gift from my coworker and friend. It's a Josh wine, and it just so happens that her fiance is named Josh as well, so it's only fair. We're going to be discussing a short story called Afterward by Edith Wharton. Renny, you have a discussion starter?
I was amazed when this was first nominated because I didn't think anybody much younger than I am really knows who Edith Wharton is. So that was interesting to see. She did write other ghost stories. So why did she write this ghost story?
Edith Wharton I recognize most is House of Mirth. I think that's the one that many have in mind. I think this was an interesting angle as far as having this pretty somewhat arrogant and naive couple moving into this quote-unquote haunted house because they thought it would be an experience. They would be able to engage in the more detached feelings of being in a haunted atmosphere. It's kind of like
Beetlejuice, if you think about it, right? The people
that's
that moved into that, right? They kind of gave me that kind of vibe where they were like interested in a haunted house for the sake of the novelty of it.
I think the difference, weren't the people in Beetlejuice a little bit outwardly kooky?
Yes.
I mean, these people, you could tell that by the way that they acted, but my initial impression was that they were what you would see from your upper-class Victorian England.
Yeah, well, Wharton has a whole book. It's called Men and Ghosts. It's all short story anthologies of her ghost stories. And she said that people often asked her why she wrote them, and she said she didn't believe in ghosts, but she was afraid of them.
Originally, it was published in Century magazine in 1910.
Yes, that's when my parents were born, and that's when Mark Twain died.
The Men and Ghosts was where it made its second appearance, beyond being released within Chronicle.
I thought it was really interesting. I actually read it 3 times. However,
You have to.
Afterwards, the 3rd time, first of all, I looked up. They went to a house that was basically abandoned. It was a mansion. Didn't have electricity, didn't have running water, needed a tremendous amount of work in the gardens, on the roof. And they wanted that because they said they thought that would make them feel English. They had come from America. He had just become wealthy with a deal with a mining company that's not going to prove well during the story. I think that she called it Ling or Line, L-Y-N-E, N-G-L-Y-N-G, and I think she meant lying because that's a big problem actually in the story among the couple. The problem with the ghost is actually the house didn't exactly have the ghost. They had the ghost. It was their ghost.
Yeah, that was the part that was a little bit interesting, right? Because they talk about when they're looking for the place to buy, they want a haunted house.
Yeah.
And the woman says, and the ghost kind of fits within that motif, but then again, it's not the ghost of the house. It's more of the ghost of what they brought with them.
With them.
Yeah.
And that can be viewed in any which way, too.
Yeah, so
it could be viewed in an allegorical way. It could also be viewed in just for its face value as being part of the piece.
Well, the husband was very weird in the beginning because they had their cousin speaking to them who said you would know if there was a ghost, but you wouldn't know until long afterwards, which they begin and end the story with. But he said, for instance, there were lots of houses in England that supposedly boasted the ghost that they have, but he didn't want to go 10 miles to see somebody else's ghost. He wanted his own ghost in his house. That's what he wanted. He conjured it himself, I think, in Macbeth, after Macbeth sends men out to kill his best friend Banquo, but they're supposed to be at a feast. Well, he knows Banquo's dead, but because people are missing him, he invites him to come, so his ghost comes. You invite evil in.
Mm-hmm.
So they really do that to themselves, although the wife doesn't seem to be as cognizant of all that has gone on, at least not until the very end.
I mean, initially she's thinking about the financial matters, that she's thinking about the money and whatnot, leading up till the point that her husband Ned disappears. Allegedly, he goes away with a stranger. They come to the conclusion that he was taken away by a ghost. This ghost Ling, but this ghost being the creation of their own fiber.
They saw the ghost earlier, but the ghost was not strong enough to come to the house at that time.
Because the man wasn't dead yet.
He hadn't died entirely yet. He was comatose. Yes, that was interesting also.
I would imagine so.
Well, they used to have lots of ghosts in Great Britain, they said, but since they've cleared up a lot of the smog and fog, people don't see quite as many ghosts as they used to see since it's clear. But this ghost does come in the daytime and speaks and writes something on a piece of paper that's taken to Ned when he's in the library, and he goes out to meet him. I have to say, I think if that happened to me and I got that letter, I wouldn't go out to meet him.
You have pretty good willpower. I mean, initially there would be that sense of curiosity that'd be urging me to do so.
Oh, I don't think so.
It depends on what you think is going to happen. Whether or not the ghost is going to consume, kidnap, kill.
Whatever he does.
But otherwise, it would be, your willpower has to be very strong.
Well, the ghost is kind of not particularly described. He's evidently youngish. I don't know why he would have been in a owning deal if he was quite young. He's wearing a slouch hat, so you can't really see him very well. He's evidently soft-spoken when he does speak, because he does speak to the wife. So exactly what he was like, the maids can't describe him. One of the maids at least does see him. And the wife actually saw him because they spoke briefly. She saw him walk away, but we don't really know exactly what he was like. I'm going to take it that he was the kind of ghost that looked just like a real person, cast a shadow, seemed to be opaque. You can see through him. He wasn't wispy, so he was like an actual person as a ghost.
Yeah, it seems that way. It seems because that's part of the idea that you wouldn't know it was a ghost.
That's why you didn't know it was a ghost.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And again, he's in the daytime. He's not appearing at midnight on the top of the stairs or something.
That is somewhat ironic, contrasting, because most of your ghosts appear at night.
Yes, in the dark, in the silence.
Yeah.
Actually, she said one time to have a ghost you needed silence and consistency. That's what she thought belonged in the story. I'm not sure exactly how well that is. I thought maybe the house could have been described a little bit more, since it is supposed to be dark and spooky, and that's why they're there. We only really see the library a little bit. And she talks about, it's got a hooded fireplace in there and it's dark. They like to look out the window as it gets dark in December. But we don't really get much of a description of the house, unlike, say, Poe when he does the House of Usher.
Poe is very descriptive with the way that where he talks about his setting and laying things out in general.
But I think it's a terrific story. I recommended it. Since I first read it was, I guess, last year. I have recommended the story to a number of people. The story is a long story, but people at the time wrote longer pieces than they do today. My students, the past 2 or 3 pages, they can barely hold the book all
This one's
over.
about 30 pages.
This is a long, short story. Actually, one of the criticisms I read called it a novelette. It's not probably really a novelette, but it is a long, short story.
It is in chapters, too.
Yes, it's in 5 chapters.
I would say for anybody that's coming in as someone that's getting into reading in this nature, as much as I discourage this practice for the most part, I think one of the best ways to understand this better is to read a summary of it. Even if, despite the fact I think I like the experience of reading so that you find out as you read along what the conclusion is. But with this one, I think that for people just getting into this particular genre of Gothic American literature, that getting a summary about everything being laid out would be...
I don't know that I would agree with that, because with this, it develops slowly, long time, a lot of criticism. I don't want to read that much. Really, she does a slow, but she builds it up to the idea that there is horror in the house that the woman is now possessed by. But if you read a summary ahead of time and you find out about the ghost, the afterwards is not as striking.
I mean, the other option would be to read it several times, because this one requires full concentration.
It really does.
It's very, very dense.
There's something about the style that she writes in that's a little bit off-putting, I think. It's not that it's off-putting, but it's a little confusing.
Yes.
Her sentences are probably about twice as long as they need to be.
It's much more 19th century style
and that's
than
why
what we're used to.
And that's why an entry reader would benefit from just having things laid out. If you're somebody that is into that kind of, if they're trying to read things like Crime and Punishment.
It's like, I'm going to tell you what's happening and be witty about it at the same time, to a point where it's almost like, I'm not sure what just happened.
Well, we all read and write today like Hemingway, who came out of journalism. Short sentences, short paragraphs, very few adjectives and adverbs, move right along, bang, bang, bang. When people were first writing long materials, they took their time. Yes, I mean, Poe has a sentence somewhere and it's like 3 pages. So I always say to my students, if you want to develop vocabulary, read Poe. He had a terrific Latinette vocabulary.
Edgar Allan Poe is a great entry-level writer.
Yes.
Because his works are engaging. As much as he is very descriptive, what he covers is bound to grab your attention. Be it he talks about something that interests the reader for whatever reason.
He's also short. Many of his stories are not that long. Usher is a little bit longer, but a lot of them run 3, 4, 5 pages, maybe at the most. And he produced a good number of them. And he influenced her, along with Henry James, who's famous for In the Turn of the Screw, which is one of the great short stories, or novels. It's a full novel that's ever been written. He supposedly very much encouraged her in her ghost stories. I thought that was interesting, too, why you would actually... She came from the upper classes. She was very well educated and had her own money, had her own life entirely, built her own mansion. And so I thought it was really interesting that she would be taken up. She didn't just write this one, she wrote enough to fill an anthology with them. And I've never read any of the others, but I think I'm going to, because I thought this was really fascinating.
I would be up to revisiting something by Edith Wharton.
I was very impressed that you guys knew who Edith Wharton was, because well, I don't know who originally proposed her, but I mean, I would say for the most part today, my students have certainly never heard of her.
Jesse's brother Nick was the one that originally proposed. He selected it, but
I was impressed.
He has been able to take part for quite some time.
I thought, who would know who she is today? I don't know that my students really know who Hemingway or Fitzgerald is today.
I think with Fitzgerald, I think the fact that Fitzgerald wrote The Great Gatsby, that's pretty much an infinite
now it's a
work.
Supplement, yes, for many students.
But,
and there's been many movies.
Yeah, Hemingway wrote enough memorable material that people
but they are not in the anthologies.
Maybe not the anthologies.
Today. Where are they going to read them? See, that's the thing. They're not exposed anywhere else. They're watching TV. They're looking at their phone.
BookTube.
That's a good...
There's a lot of Hemingway fans on BookTube.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
We went over quite a few, and they got a good response. The Hemingway discussions.
Well, Hemingway was the writer in the world when I was a young person, and then because he had 4 wives, innumerable liaisons, went safarying, went deep sea fishing. When the second wave of feminism came up, they didn't want Hemingway. I mean, I had colleagues who said I wouldn't teach Hemingway for any reason whatsoever. He said he created the anti-hero. He created the entire way everyone, I don't care if you're in China, writes and reads today, for no other reason, even if you don't like The Old Man in the Sea or you don't like The Sun Also Rises. Yes, they wanted to wipe him out, and they wanted to make Fitzgerald the man of the moment. He got a stamp, he got a statue in Minneapolis, and they just wanted to wipe Hemingway out. But they're not, for instance, Shelley, my favorite romantic poet, he's not in the anthologies now either. That breaks breaks my heart.
There's a few that they should be...
They want to expand the canon, and to do that, they're dropping all kinds of stuff.
That's a very tough one, though, because... Yes. As unfortunate as it sounds, in order to create a more diverse canon, it's going to take time, because as the years go by, you have to be able to measure the best possible quality of writing, and you want to have everybody, every voice on equal footing. The unfortunate thing is that during the previous years, but we'll say more so centuries, most of what was released was from upper high-end white male writers. Some of them wrote fantastically, whereas with female writers, they either had to publish under an alias, or when you go even further back, their works were destroyed. All you have are fragments. Like with Sappho. Sappho is probably one of the more fortunate ones compared to those...
There are some left. Yeah, there's not much, but there is something left. That's true. And even with Wharton, supposedly in her books, she very frequently uses, in this story, for instance, it's in a third-person narration, but it's really from the wife's experience, what she's doing, what she's interested in, what she likes, what she's afraid of. And supposedly Wharton took that up because it was the beginning of women. They're not going to have the vote here till 1919, but she's writing this in 1910. It's to bring women forward and, you know, what they're concerned about, what their emphasis in life is. And she wrote other materials too, and my favorite is the Age of Innocence. So.
Well, that's another one that people recognize. This here there's 29 short stories in here, which I'm very pleased with, because that means there are 29 works that we have access to from a female voice in literature, as far as someone as of Edith Wharton's caliber is concerned.
And she was published at the time, and she was well known also.
And that is quite an accomplishment.
Yeah.
For instance, someone like Charlotte Perkins Gilman, there's not as much attributed to her. The Yellow Wallpaper is the one that has really stuck out, and she wrote other things, but we really don't have as much decent access to it.
I don't think she produced as much, and she probably was not as famous as much as Wharton either. And there certainly must have been other writers that fall into that, but we don't know who they are.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back and look at, say, people that won the Pulitzers in the 20s and 30s, we have never heard of most of them at all. They were famous in their own time. They got their prize in their own time, but it didn't last.
Even the Nobel Prize in Literature, too.
Yes.
Because Sully Poudron is the first Nobel Prize in Literature winner. Leo Tolstoy never won. It was very European-centric because of its setting in Sweden.
Fitzgerald, he never won anything. Hemingway won everything, but Fitzgerald never won anything, which I'm surprised at, because he was more famous and wealthier and well-known, and I think also creative in many ways than Hemingway was. Hemingway was the man's man. Bang, 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 bang. That's what he was interested in.
Do we have any final thoughts about Afterward?
Talking about it, the way that it's about the house and how it's like, I wonder if it might have inspired The Shining as well in a way. Because of the way that she describes the house as having witnessed many horrors, and probably, right? Or she's talking about that a little bit. So I wonder if that idea kind of took off, because both of these stories are very unconventional ghost stories, where the ghost is not of somebody that lived, but is kind of based on what you bring into it. So
I mean, with The Shining, I feel as if what makes the Overlook Hotel horrific is the attributes of the hotel. I mean, there is that supernatural element, but a lot of it is also the horrors that exist within people.
Yes.
And I think, in a way, this too explores the horrors that exist within people, but but in that way, flaws.
But they are not so much the house. Even though she feels the house knows everything, we don't, I think, get much from the house actually in the story. That's why I said there's not much real detail. The size, the number of rooms. She does talk about the garden and how when you look outside you could see the yew trees, and there's a big swath in the front, I guess, where you could see people walking up and down, but they don't in a way, they don't really do that much with the house. They're really interested in how she has her relationship with her husband, and how that might not be what really was the relationship.
And that's probably what makes it very wordy, but not as detailed. I think it may create a more challenging reading experience. And I would say that Afterward was a bit of a challenging reading experience.
Has a lot of dialogue. I think that's very interesting. And so you get a very good feeling of how they did relate to one another. But the husband to me also seems very vague. He's there, but he's not there. He's locked. He's in the library writing something, but who knows what he's actually really doing. When you talk about The Shining, he's writing the same stupid thing over and over and over again.
All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
Not really writing at all.
Yeah.
I don't know whether Ned was really writing. We don't know. She went through his papers, but she doesn't really say specifically, except for that little note, anything else that was there. How much he had produced. Was he really doing a book?
Yeah, so that's kind of reminiscent of The Shining too. I wonder how much influence.
Yeah, that sounds. It's a good comparison.
In a way, Jack became the house.
He melted into the house.
Melted in, and in a way, I mean, the difference is Ned just disappeared.
Yeah,
but
I don't know where he went.
Yeah, Jack, as how we knew him, disappeared as well.
Well, then at the end, I don't know, I can't remember from the book, but in the movie, they have a picture from the 20s, and he's right there in the front.
It was different.
You've always been the groundskeeper.
It was. He turned into this. He ended up dying too. He was in the book where he turned into this horrific monster that he couldn't even turn back from that, and I think that was illustrated by him hitting himself so hard with the mallet that it deformed him, and he was killed in the showdown. Otherwise, if you're interested in reading Afterward and Edith Wharton's other short stories, here is the collected stories of Edith Wharton, selected and introduced by Anita Bruckner. And I want to thank you guys for tuning in, and be sure to join us next time for another episode of Literary Gladiators. For now, keep reading.